Droopy is a fan favorite and highly successful beetle weight that competes at NHRL. It's 19-5 overall at the event, and it was the 2020 Grand Champion. And I just built a cheap knockoff version of it. This is a prototype for a robot that I might decide to compete with, and right now I'm going with the name Eel With It. It's made entirely out of old and spare parts from my other robot, Moray, parts from the dollar store, and a chassis that I 3D printed for free, as well as googly eyes. So the way that Droopy works is that it has no wheels or legs or any kind of drive system, so instead it uses its two weapons to move. Droopy has a horizontal spinning bar on each side of the robot, so that when it spins up the right side weapon, it moves to the right, and when it spins up the left side weapon, the whole robot swings to the left. This is called a gyro walker because the gyroscopic force of the spinners causes Droopy to vibrate around the arena and move. There are plenty of robots now that use this Droopy design, and one advantage that it has is that most events offer a weight bonus to robots who use unconventional locomotion. For Eel With It, I used spare Moray electronics, and instead of any drive motors, I just used two of the weapon motors. I had some old Moray uprights from a previous version that wouldn't ever be used in combat, so I used those to hold the motors on. And then for the chassis, I just made a box in CAD and added some mounting holes for the uprights and switch. A lot of public libraries have a free 3D printer that you can use, so I just did that for the chassis. And then so the robot could vibrate around when the weapons spin up, I needed something like bristles for it to slide around on, so I bought some toothbrushes at Dollar Tree, cut the heads off, and screwed them to the bottom of the chassis. And then I put googly eyes on it, because everything's better with googly eyes. If you also want to make a terrible Droopy clone using Viper Kit parts, the weapon ESCs don't have a BEC to provide power to the receiver, so I had to use two batteries, and one was plugged directly into the receiver. For the first test, I used two bar spinners I had for an older version of Moray. Let's see how it went. Not very well. Let's see how the second test went.
Oh! The whole thing came off. What happened?
Not very well. The entire weapon motor with the weapon attached flew off because the screws weren't tight enough. One wire got ripped completely out of its insulation, and I tried to solder it back on, but it didn't really work, so I lost a weapon motor to this thing. You can also see that it falls over after a hit with no way to get up, which meant that I had to fix that somehow. But before I show you the next test, I went to the National Aquarium recently to get my logo eel approved. This is Percy, the California Moray eel, and I'm happy to say that the Team Moray logo is Percy approved. Alright, back to the robot. To fix the falling over issue, I did the only logical thing and taped a tennis ball to it. Also, I decided to use Moray's small blades for this to see how that would work. This test actually went pretty well. Even though the spinners were much smaller, they still produced enough force to make Eel With It walk. The test materials it was hitting were a soda can and an old TPU Moray chassis that I couldn't use anymore. The tiny spinners delivered some nice hits, and the tennis ball actually did its job. The one thing that wasn't great is that I can't reverse the direction of the spinners without swapping the wires, so it got right up on the wall and it couldn't easily get out of that situation. The TPU had some mild cuts, and the can was ripped open pretty bad. For the final test, I put the big bar spinners back on. It moves really well with the larger weapons because they generate more force when they spin up. It's hard to drive it in my test box though, because the limited space means that the spinners can hit the wall really easily, so I had to be conservative with the movement or the spinners would hit the wall and knock the whole robot away. The spinners hit hard as expected, but it was just hard not to hit the walls. It also got stuck in the corner. I set it back upright, and overall it was going well. Oh, never mind. Since I used the public library's 3D printing service, I printed the chassis out of PLA, which is the filament that they use. It's not a material that's very good for combat robots since it cracks and doesn't take hits well, but this was a prototype and really just a fun idea that I had. It couldn't take the shock from the hits and cracked at the base of one of the uprights. So this was just an idea that I had, and I might make a competitive version of it. I have some ideas that I don't think I've seen a gyro walker do before. It won't be anything like this cheap version I made though. Though I actually might use the toothbrushes because those were surprisingly effective. So yeah, I might turn this into a competitive robot at some point, but for the next robot I make, I do have an idea.